Boston, 1849. The letter arrived 3 weeks after the burial. Louisa Harding held it against the thin October light, reading, yet again, the 3 trembling lines her brother had managed to write before the world crushed a life far too young to bear it. "He ruined me, Lou. The Duke of Somerset left nothing. Forgive me." The ink had bled at the final words. Tears, perhaps. Or maybe Jonathan's hand had simply shaken so violently the pen slipped out of control. Louisa had spent nights trying to decide which truth hurt less, as if finding an answer could undo anything. As if it could change the fact that Jonathan had sailed to England 5 years earlier, carrying dreams larger than life, and returned in a sealed coffin that denied even a final look. Outside, the Atlantic hurled itself against the Cape Cod rocks with the restless fury of a distant storm. Louisa stood at the tall library window, the same one where Jonathan, when she was 8, used to point out constellations and whisper that the world held infinite possibilities. Now it framed nothing but absence. The entire house smelled of furniture sold in desperation, drawers emptied too quickly, a future stripped bare. She folded the letter carefully. She could now do it without her hands shaking, and slipped it inside her bodice close to a heart that insisted on beating when everything else had stopped. Vengeance. A bitter word on the tongue of a woman raised on Sunday hymns and embroidery lessons, yet grief reshaped people, turned obedient daughters into women willing to cross oceans. The siren's call would leave Boston in 3 days, third-class ticket, a single trunk. £20 sewn into the lining of her coat, and a name carved into memory like a sentence, the Duke of Somerset. Rumour said he lived exiled in the Scottish Highlands, ruined and forgotten by the same society that once bowed to him. Rumour said many things. Louisa didn't know what was truth and what was myth, but she knew this. He breathed. Jonathan did not. And that, she decided in the silence of the emptied library, was an injustice no ocean was wide enough to shield him from. If you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing. It helps the channel continue bringing new tales to life, and now, please enjoy the rest of the story. Louisa Harding had never been called beautiful, not in the glazed, soft way society liked to label women. At 26, she carried the austere beauty of New England, sharp bones, amber eyes too intense for comfort, brown hair always pinned with uncompromising severity, a beauty you noticed only on the second look, a beauty that did not apologize. Daughter of a respectable Boston merchant, she grew between ledgers and sermons, taught that honest work was rewarded and that life followed rules. Jonathan had been different, dreaming, ambitious, too bold for the world he wanted to conquer. The son their father adored, the brother she had vowed to protect. When Jonathan's letters from London stopped, Louisa knew women often sense death before it knocks. 3 months later, the coffin arrived. Then came the creditors. Then came the silence of a house without laughter. The name Somerset had appeared in Jonathan's last letters, first with admiration, then with unease, then with fear. A fallen duke, people whispered. A man whose ruin dragged others down with him. A man now hiding in some forgotten corner of Scotland, far from the society that had cast him out. Louisa sold everything. Her mother's jewellery, the silverware, even the house. She bought passage on a merchant ship and packed a single trunk. She said no goodbyes. There was no one left to say them to. Vengeance weighed less than grief and was infinitely easier to carry. Chapter 1. The Weight of the Crossing. The crossing lasted 42 days, 42 days in which Louisa learned that the ocean tolerated no illusions. The Atlantic was merciless that season, indifferent to prayers whispered by passengers or promises barked by captains. She spent hours in her narrow third-class bunk, listening to wood groan and sick passengers moan, reciting Jonathan's last letter until the words lost shape and became nothing but pain. He ruined me, Lou. What kind of man ruined another so completely? What kind of duke, fallen or not, left devastation in his wake? During the sleepless nights, Louisa built him in her mind. Cold eyes, cruel mouth, hands that had never known honest work. an aristocrat who played with men's lives as if they were chess pieces, sacrificing them to protect his own ambitions. Jonathan had been young, too trusting, too hopeful. Prey. Liverpool emerged on a fog-soaked November morning, wrapped in coal smoke and the smell of fish. Louisa stepped off the ship with her battered trunk and the £20 sewn hidden in her coat, everything that remained of the Harding fortune. The moment her boots touched English soil, something hardened inside her, not courage, something sharper, more dangerous, certainty. The boarding house she found near the docks was in a neighbourhood where women asked no questions, and no one offered answers. The room smelled of mildew and cheap disinfectant. Louisa sat on the narrow bed, removed her soaked boots, and, for the first time in 6 weeks, allowed herself to feel fear. Not fear of what she planned to do, fear of what would remain of her once vengeance was done, but fear would have to wait. She had work to do. For the next 5 days, she marched through solicitors' offices and gentlemen's clubs with the determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. She pretended to look for a distant cousin, used her American accent as armor, and slipped coins into the right hands. Information came in fragments. The Duke of Somerset lived in Glenmore, an isolated estate deep in the Scottish Highlands. No one had seen him in years. Some said he'd gone mad. Others said he drank himself numb. Rumors multiplied like ghosts, impossible to separate truth from invention. But one truth remained. He was alive, breathing the same air Jonathan no longer could. The journey north was endless, first by train to Edinburgh on the newly opened rail line, then by coach along mud-choked roads winding between mountains blanketed in heather. With every mile the world grew wilder, colder, more unforgiving. When the tiny village finally appeared, Louisa's breath hitched. A cluster of dark stone houses huddled together as if bracing against the unrelenting wind. Slate roofs glistened with damp. Smoke curled from crooked chimneys. The single muddy road held the bare essentials of survival: an inn, a forge, a shop that could have been anything. Here is where he hides. The coach stopped before the village's lone inn, a weather-worn 2-story building with whitewash long surrendered to time and a heavy oak door scarred by winters. A faded sign swung overhead. The Stag's Rest. "I'm looking for the Duke of Somerset," Louisa said, voice steady. "I have business with him." The innkeeper, a broad Scot with a greying red beard and an apron stained with ale, appeared in the doorway. His gaze raked over her, suspicion tightening every line of his face. American women didn't arrive alone in places like this. Women alone rarely arrived at all. "Nobody has business with the Duke," he muttered. "He doesn't receive visitors. He'll receive me." Something in her tone, her stance perhaps, made him hesitate. He scratched his beard, glanced toward the muddy road, then back at her. "Are ye kin to him?" "No." "A creditor?" Louisa gave a humorless smile. "Something like that." The man sighed the sigh of someone who'd seen enough madness for several lifetimes. "Estates 3 miles north. But I'll warn you, he's not a man fond of strangers, especially—" His eyes slid over her. "Women." She picked up her trunk, ignoring the implication. "Thank you for the warning." The walk was worse than expected. The road was barely a path. Stones, mud, and pools of cold water. Rain began before the first mile was done, soaking her shawl, loosening pins from her hair. Louisa kept her head down, counting steps, letting anger fuel every movement. Had Jonathan walked this path? Had he come full of hope, unaware ruin waited for him? By the time the gates of Glenmore appeared, the sun was already sinking, if the pale smear of light could be called sun at all. The gates hung open, creaking in the wind. No guards, no signs of life. Louisa stepped through as if crossing an invisible boundary, feeling the weight of what she was about to do settle on her skin. The house rose before her, massive, shadowed, its windows black as empty sockets. Dead ivy clung to its stone walls. Silence swallowed everything. She climbed the steps, lifted her hand and struck the heavy oak door 3 times. The knock echoed through the emptiness like gunfire. Nothing. She knocked again, harder. "Open the door!" I know someone is inside." Still nothing. She raised her fist for a third strike when the door swung open without warning. A man filled the doorway, too tall for the frame, shoulders broad beneath a wrinkled linen shirt, trousers stained with mud, or something darker. His black hair hung too long, wild. His eyes, an unnatural, feverish green, were empty in a way that made something cold coil in her stomach, unshaven, smelling of whiskey and old fire. He stared at her without a word, expression hollow. This was not what she expected. He was nothing like what she had expected. "Are you the Duke of Somerset?" she asked, hating how her voice thinned. He tilted his head, studying her with slow, clinical curiosity. Then something flickered in those dead green eyes. Not recognition, not interest, just exhaustion that seemed centuries old. "If you came all the way here," he said, voice rough from disuse, "then I must have been... once." And he closed the door in her face. Chapter 2. Exile has a face. Julian Ashby, 6th Duke of Somerset, rested his forehead against the cold wood of the door and waited. He waited for the woman to knock again, to shout, to demand entrance like the others who occasionally appeared. Creditors, distant relatives begging for favors, strangers drawn by the ruined Duke legend. He waited for her to give up. But no second knock came. Only silence, followed by the steady sound of footsteps descending the stone steps. Firm steps. Unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. Julian pushed away from the door, rubbed a hand over his face, and felt the coarse beard he hadn't bothered trimming in days. Weeks, perhaps. Time had a strange way of sliding through the fingers when one did nothing but exist. He walked back to the library, the only room where he still kept a fire burning, and poured himself a whiskey. His third of the afternoon. Or fourth. He no longer counted. The woman at the doorstep had been American. The accent had betrayed her, even in the few words she spoke. Young, rain-soaked dark hair, eyes the color of burnt honey that had stared at him with an unsettling intensity, as if she knew him, as if she could see through him. Julian sank into the worn leather armchair and watched the flames climb the hearth. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had knocked on his door. Months, certainly. The people in the village had learned not to disturb him. The servants, what few he still had, used the back entrances, did their work in silence, and vanished before he was aware of them. It suited everyone, but that woman had not looked like a servant, nor like a curious wanderer. She had arrived with purpose. He swallowed the whiskey in a single burning mouthful. Purpose, a strange word, almost foreign now. There had been a time when Julian Ashby overflowed with purpose, ambition even. He had been far too young when he inherited the dukedom, only 23, determined to prove he was more than a name and a title. He invested in business ventures, railways, bold speculations, believed in men who deserved no trust, signed guarantees he should not have signed. And when everything collapsed, when companies failed, banks demanded payment, and partners vanished, it was his name plastered in the newspapers. Duke of Somerset ruins entire families. Financial scandal shakes high society. Unpaid accounts, broken promises, lives shattered. It did not matter that he had lost everything as well. It did not matter that he spent 2 years trying to pay every debt, selling off estates, auctioning everything he owned. Society needed a villain, and fallen dukes fit the role perfectly. He remembered the last ball he attended, 3 years ago, maybe 4, doors closing as he passed, conversations dying in his wake. Lady Stirling's gaze, she who once smiled at him with promises in her lips, now cold as marble. "You are a disgrace to your name, Somerset." It was the final thing anyone in society said to him before he left for Glenmore and never returned. Disgrace. Yes, perhaps he was, but disgrace hurt less when seen from a distance. A noise at the entrance pulled him back from the memories. Mrs. Campbell, the housekeeper who stubbornly remained though he barely afforded her, entered with a basket of firewood. She was a woman in her 50s, face carved by Highland winds, hands rough from work. She never asked questions, never judged, simply did what needed doing. There was a woman at the door, she said, without preamble, stacking wood beside the hearth. American. She said she'll return tomorrow. Julian lifted his eyes. Did she say what she wants? No, but she left this. Mrs. Campbell handed him a rain-blotted envelope, crumpled and soft at the corners. He accepted it reluctantly, as though it were a burning coal. He turned it over. No seal, no address. Only his title, written in firm, feminine handwriting. Duke of Somerset. Not your grace, not sir. Just the title. Sharp as accusation. Julian opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet. 3 words that made his blood turn to ice. Jonathan Harding. Remember him. The room tilted. Julian read the words again, then a third time as if repetition might soften their meaning. Jonathan Harding. Of course he remembered. A young American with too many dreams and too easy a smile. He had arrived in London 5 years earlier, with glowing letters of recommendation and ambition too large for his chest. He had invested everything he owned, and everything he borrowed, into the mining company Julian helped establish. The company that collapsed 6 months later, taking everything with it. Julian shut his eyes, but the memory forced its way in. Jonathan in his office, face pale, hands trembling around documents that had become nothing but ash. Your Grace, I invested not just my savings. I borrowed. I gave guarantees in my family's name. They told me it was safe. Then they told you wrong, Julian had cut in, his voice colder than he intended. We all lost, Mr. Harding. There is nothing I can do. It had been true. By then, Julian himself was drowning in debt, selling what remained to pay what he could. He could not save Jonathan Harding. He could not save anyone. The young man had left his office with his shoulders bent, youth draining from him like water. Months later, Julian heard whispers, rumors that Harding returned to America, and then more whispers in club corridors. The man had not survived the shame. Suicide, some claimed. Illness, others said. Julian never asked for confirmation. There were too many ruins already. One more hardly mattered. Until now. Someone remembered. Someone had come to collect. The woman, he said at last, voice rough. What did she look like? Mrs. Campbell shrugged. Young, too thin, eyes that don't blink, the sort who doesn't leave just because she's told to. Julian stared at the paper in his hand. Remember him? He remembered every name, every face, every life touched and stained by his choices. He did not need letters to remind him. When she returns, he said, tell her I'm not here. I told her that already. She said she'll wait. Then let her wait. Mrs. Campbell studied him with an expression that might have been pity or simply weariness. You know she won't give up, don't you? I've seen women like her before. They come for something, and they don't leave without it. I have nothing left to give anyone, Julian answered. And it was a truth so complete, it no longer hurt. She left without comment. Julian remained alone with the fire, the whiskey, and the note that felt far heavier than paper. 3 words. A name. A debt delivered too late to change anything. He crushed the note in his hand and tossed it into the flames. He watched it curl, blacken, crumble into ash, but the words remained etched in his mind. Jonathan Harding. Remember him? Yes. God help him. Yes. And now a woman, an American woman with amber-burning eyes and unshakable resolve, had come to ensure he would never forget again. Julian poured himself another whiskey and tried not to acknowledge the truth that had crept into him for the first time in years. He felt something other than numbness, fear, not of scandal or violence, those had already found him, but fear of something worse, having to face what he had done. Having to see, reflected in that woman's eyes, every wrong choice of his past. Night fell over Glenmore with the brutal speed of the Highlands. Julian stayed in the armchair, listening to the wind claw at the towers, the fire crackle, the vast silence of the empty house press in, and he realized perhaps for the first time that exile might not have been punishment enough. Perhaps the past had finally come to claim what was owed. Chapter 3. The Vigil of Fury. Louisa did not return to the inn. Instead, She found shelter in an abandoned stable halfway between the village and Glenmore, a moss-covered stone structure with a sagging roof that allowed rain to fall through in slow, patient drops. There was old hay in one corner and the lingering scent of horses long gone. She wrapped herself in her drenched shawl and waited. Anger kept her warm. Anger at the slammed door, the hollow stare, the careless dismissal buried in those 3 words. I must have been once. As if the title meant nothing. As if Jonathan meant nothing. As if everything could be erased with indifference and whiskey. He doesn't even remember, she thought, fists tight in her lap. He ruined lives, and he doesn't even remember the names. But he would. She would make certain of it. The night crawled by without mercy. Cold crept through the tears in her shawl, seeped into her bones, made a home in her spine. She did not sleep. She simply closed her eyes and let memory replay every piece of her brother. Jonathan teaching her to swim in the creek behind the house. Jonathan defending her when schoolboys mocked her books. Jonathan leaving for England with a suitcase full of hope and promises to return rich. I'll build our fortune, Lou. I'll make the Harding name mean something. Now the Harding name meant debt and a grave without flowers. When morning came, or whatever passed for morning in that land of eternal mist, Louisa stood, body aching, resolve sharpened. She brushed the straw from her dress, pinned her hair with fingers stiff from cold, and walked back toward Glenmore. This time, she did not go to the front door. She circled the estate until she found a side entrance, half hidden beneath dead ivy. The door was unlocked. Neglect or surrender, it hardly mattered. She slipped inside. The interior was worse than the exterior, furniture draped in ghostly sheets, portraits turned to face the wall, a smell of mold and memories rotting in the dark. Louisa moved through the shadowed corridors, listening only to her own footsteps and the groaning of old wood. No servants in sight, no signs of life, except a thin line of smoke rising somewhere upstairs. She climbed the staircase carefully, avoiding steps that looked ready to give way. The corridor above was narrow, lined with closed doors. All but one, slightly ajar, leaking firelight and warmth. Louisa approached silently and peered through the gap. He was there, the Duke, asleep in a chair before the fire, head tilted, one arm hanging over the side with an empty glass still caught in his fingers. Firelight carved shadows across his face, a face that should have been handsome, she realized with a flicker of irritation. A strong jaw, aristocratic features even beneath the unshaven beard, eyelashes far too long for a man. But something was broken in the expression, even in sleep, like cracked glass that held its shape but no longer reflected anything clearly. Louisa pushed the door. It groaned on its hinges. He woke instantly, with the reflex of someone who had once been a soldier, or someone who had learned to sleep expecting attack. His green eyes found hers, widened briefly, then narrowed in recognition. "You," he said, voice hoarse from sleep and liquor. "How did you get in?" Through the door. It was open. Louisa stepped fully inside and shut it behind her. "Your Grace doesn't seem particularly concerned with security." He stood, slowly, carefully, as though every movement hurt. Up close he was even larger, shoulders broad beneath the wrinkled shirt, height forcing Louisa to lift her chin to meet his gaze. Still, she did not step back. "There's nothing here worth stealing," he said. "And if you've come to kill me, you'll find little resistance." The flatness of it startled her. Not bravado, not fear, just fact, as if death were merely another inconvenience. "I didn't come to kill you," Louisa said. "I came to make your Grace remember. Jonathan Harding." He spoke the name without hesitation this time, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, guilt, exhaustion, all tangled, too fleeting to read. "You were related to him," he said. "Sister." Silence. The fire crackled. Louisa saw his jaw tighten. "I am sorry," he said at last, and it rang true, which made everything sting worse. "I'm sorry for what happened to your brother, but I cannot undo the past. I cannot return what was lost. If you've come seeking compensation, you will find only this." He gestured around the crumbling room, the empty glass, the wreckage of his life. I have nothing left. I didn't come for money. Then what? Revenge? Satisfaction? He stepped closer, and Louisa realized he was trembling, not with fear, but with anger held on a fraying thread. Do you want me on my knees? Want me to beg? Want to witness humiliation? Look closely, Miss Harding. It is already before you, a duke unworthy of his title, a man who destroyed everything he touched and now lives in exile because he cannot bear to face what he's done. Does that please you? His voice rose, frayed, raw, carrying a note of desperation that cut deeper than Louisa expected. He was not the monster she had imagined. He was only a broken man doused in guilt and whiskey, waiting for the world to stop demanding anything from him. But Jonathan had been broken too. And Jonathan was dead. I want, she said, voice steady though her hands trembled, your grace to remember his face, his name, every promise you made and broke. I want you to carry that weight every day as I do. I want you to know that Jonathan Harding existed, that he loved his family, that he died because he trusted the wrong man. I know. The confession came out torn from his throat. God help me, I know. I remember all of them. Every name, every face. Do you think whiskey erases anything? It doesn't, it only makes it bearable for a few hours. He turned toward the window, back to her, a gesture of surrender or pure exhaustion. Louisa stood in the middle of the cold room, feeling something unexpected and unwelcome unfurl in her chest. Not pity, it could not be pity, but something near it. Something that made her see, for the first time, that vengeance wasn't as simple as crossing an ocean to confront a monster. Because monsters did not tremble. Monsters did not remember. Monsters did not carry guilt on their bent shoulders. He spoke of your grace until the end, she said softly. Said the Duke ruined him, but also said, he once admired you. He believed in you. Julian didn't respond. He only pressed his forehead to the cold window pane, shoulders rising and falling in breaths too controlled to be natural. And Louisa understood in that moment that her revenge had just become infinitely more complicated. Chapter 4. The Weight of Spectres. Julian kept his forehead against the frozen glass until the physical sting dulled the other pain, the one without name, without cure. He heard her breathing behind him, steady and patient. Women like her did not give up easily. She had crossed an entire ocean to carry a burden that was not hers. She had come to turn grief into justice. He understood. He had once done the same long ago, before learning that justice was a luxury reserved for those who still had something left to lose. Jonathan spoke of me, Julian said at last, not turning, his voice rougher than he meant. What else did he say? Silence. Then, that your grace was not like the others, that you listened, understood ambition, that you promised fortune to anyone willing to work. Julian shut his eyes. Yes, he had said those things. He had believed them too. He had been far too young, far too arrogant, far too certain he could rewrite rules carved into the bones of men for generations. Hard work brings reward, smart investment brings wealth. Trust me. I believed, he murmured. It wasn't a lie, it was naivety, stupidity perhaps. I thought I could beat a system designed to crush men like me, men like your brother. He turned, finally facing her. But I didn't win. And he paid the price for my arrogance. Louisa studied him with an expression he couldn't decipher. It wasn't pure hatred. He almost wished it were. Hatred was easier. Instead, she seemed to be measuring him, trying to reconcile the ruined man before her with the monster she had imagined. Why stay here? She asked. Why not return to London and face the consequences? I did. Julian crossed the room, poured another measure of whiskey, automatic, necessary. He didn't offer her any. He hadn't been a gentleman in so long he barely recalled the rituals. I sold everything I could, paid what I could, but it wasn't enough. Will never be enough. Too many creditors, too many ruined lives. And society. He took a harsh swallow. Society needs someone to blame. It chose me and it wasn't wrong. Were you alone in this? No partners, no co-investors? There were. Bitterness rose like bile. Men smarter than I. Men who knew when to flee, how to protect their fortunes, where to bury their guilt. But I was the Duke. My name sat on the contracts. My word sealed the promises. When everything collapsed, I was the one left holding the wreckage. Louisa took a step closer. So your Grace is the victim? That's what you're saying? Her anger struck him like a slap. Julian lifted his gaze and met the dark amber fury burning in hers. No, he said, I'm not a victim. I made the choices, signed the papers. Trusted men I shouldn't have, dragged others into the abyss because I was too blind to see the edge. Jonathan Harding trusted me and died for it. I'm not a victim, Miss Harding. I am exactly what you came here to find. And what is that? A coward. The word came far too easily. He whispered it to himself every morning. A man who didn't have the courage to keep fighting. Who fled to this forgotten corner because it was easier than meeting the eyes of the people I destroyed. She remained silent for a long time. The fire crackled. Wind screamed against the window panes. Julian waited for her to shout, accuse him, deliver the condemnation he deserved. But when Louisa finally spoke, her voice was low, almost gentle. My brother was not a coward. He returned to Boston, faced the creditors, sold everything, worked until his body failed. He died trying to pay debts that weren't his. He died defending the name your Grace stained. The words cut him like blades. Julian sank into the armchair, the whiskey heavy in his hands. I'm sorry, he said, and it sounded hollow even to him. I know it means nothing. I know words don't bring anyone back. But it's all I have. I don't want apologies. Louisa crossed her arms, spine rigid. I want to understand. How does the man my brother admired become this? She gestured to him, to the decaying room around them. How does your Grace simply give up? The question hit a place in him, he thought long dead. Julian stared at his own hands. Hands that had once signed contracts, forged alliances, carried futures. Now they only trembled, whether from drink or the lack of it, he no longer knew. When you lose everything, he said slowly, when every person you meet becomes another face you failed, when letters stop coming because no one wants their name tied to yours, when you wake each day knowing that breathing is a privilege others don't have because of you, he swallowed hard. You don't give up, Miss Harding, you simply stop trying. Silence thickened between them, heavy as winter snow. Louisa moved then, slow steps, until she stood directly before him. Julian forced himself to lift his gaze to meet those unblinking amber eyes. Jonathan didn't have the luxury of stopping, she said. He fought until his last day. He died fighting. She leaned in slightly. So don't you dare tell me you cannot fight. Not while you still breathe, still have shelter, still have a name, even a tarnished one. Don't speak to me of self-pity when my brother lies 6 feet underground. Her anger was righteous, clean, deserved. Julian almost envied it. Fury was proof of feeling. What do you want from me? He asked, too tired for evasions. Tell me and I'll do it. Just leave here in peace. Louisa studied him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression, a decision forming, unmistakable. I want, she said, your Grace to employ me. Julian blinked. What? Employ me. As a housekeeper, a companion, whatever position you find fitting. I need a place to stay. And your Grace. Her gaze swept over the neglected room. Clearly needs help. This is madness. It's justice. She lifted her chin. You destroyed my family. I have nothing. No home, no money, nowhere to sleep. So, your Grace will support what remains of it. Julian should have refused, should have dismissed her, called Mrs. Campbell, done anything except accept such an outrageous demand. But when he looked into the steady fire of her eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen in years, someone unafraid of him. Someone who saw exactly who he was and didn't turn away, and that, he realized, was far more dangerous than any vengeance. Very well, he heard himself say, stay. Chapter 5. The Architecture of Silence. Louisa woke in the servants' attic room with an aching body and a mind far too alert for the icy dawn. The mattress was thin, the blanket coarse, and the window let in wind through every crack. But it was a roof. It was shelter. And strangely, it was victory. "Stay," he had said, as if it were a concession, as if she had asked him for charity. She rose before the sun had fully lifted, old Boston habits, from years helping her father in the store, years managing the household after her mother died. She dressed in the only clean gown she had left, fixed her hair with uncompromising determination, and descended the narrow servants' staircase. The kitchen lay in the basement, a wide stone room with a vaulted ceiling and the chill of damp earth. Mrs. Campbell was already there, kneading bread dough with mechanical efficiency. She glanced at Louisa without surprise, as if her presence had already been absorbed into the rhythm of the house. "The Duke told you may stay," the housekeeper said, not as a question. "He did." "Then you should know he doesn't speak before noon. He won't eat until the sun's well up. He doesn't tolerate noise, questions, or company." Mrs. Campbell slammed the dough harder than necessary. "And he doesn't pay on time. Sometimes he doesn't pay at all." Louisa pulled an apron from a hook. "I understand. Do you?" The older woman lifted a skeptical brow. "You crossed an ocean, walked into his house uninvited, demanded employment, and now you understand?" "I came to collect a debt," Louisa said, tying the apron. "He owes my family. Now he will pay in the way he can." Mrs. Campbell studied her for a long moment. Then something, respect, or maybe weariness, softened her weathered face. "You're American to the bone. See everything as a transaction." She turned back to the dough. "But this isn't your land, girl. And that man upstairs is not a problem coin can solve. I'm not here to solve him. I'm here to make him remember." "Oh, he remembers," the housekeeper murmured. "That's the trouble. Remembers too much. That's why he drinks, why he doesn't sleep, why he's letting this house rot along with him." Louisa felt something tighten in her chest, an unwelcome sensation, too close to compassion. She pushed it away. Jonathan hadn't had the luxury of drowning in guilt. He had worked, fought, died trying. The Duke didn't deserve pity for choosing surrender. "Where do I start?" she asked simply. Mrs. Campbell pointed to a mountain of dirty dishes. "There. Then the library needs cleaning. Then the corridors. This house has 20 rooms and I am only one woman. Now we're 2. Still not enough, but it's a start." The next hours blurred into labor. Louisa scrubbed dishes, swept ashes, dusted furniture buried beneath years of neglect. Glenmore was a labyrinth of dim corridors and shuttered rooms, each whispering stories of forgotten splendor. Crooked portraits of stiff-faced ancestors, Persian rugs moth-eaten to threads, crystal chandeliers dulled by abandonment. It was a house that had surrendered its own will to live. Around midday, Louisa climbed to the library with a bucket and cloths. The door was ajar. He was inside, not in the armchair, but standing at the window, staring out at the endless moorland beneath a sky the color of pewter. He wore the same clothes as the previous day, his hair still unruly, his beard even harsher in daylight. He didn't turn when she entered. Louisa began working in silence. She pulled books from the shelves, wiping the layers of dust. The titles were eclectic: philosophy, political economy, poetry, agricultural treatises. Hands that once chose these books had sought knowledge, purpose. They were not the hands of a man who had always been empty. "You don't need to do that," he said at last, voice hoarse. "I do. It's my work." "Your work?" He let out a humorless laugh. "You crossed the ocean to scrub the house of a man you hate." Louisa paused, cloth in hand. "I do not hate your grace." He turned, those green eyes locking onto hers with a force that startled her. "You should. It would be easier." "Easier is not what I came for." "Then what?" he demanded. "Vengeance through sweeping? Punishment through dusting?" His tone held bitterness, but also genuine curiosity. "What do you gain by staying here, cleaning the ruins of a stranger's life, Miss Harding?" Louisa held his gaze. "Your Grace is not a stranger. You are the man who destroyed my brother, and as long as I'm here, as long as you see me every day, you cannot forget. You cannot pretend Jonathan never existed." Silence expanded between them. Julian looked away first, turning back toward the window. "I don't pretend," he said quietly. "Never have. But seeing you here, in this house." He dragged a hand down his face. "It's like having a spectre walking the corridors. A spectre that breathes, that accuses simply by existing. Good." The word came sharper than she intended. "Then you'll feel a fraction of what I felt when I buried my brother." She expected anger, defense, something. But Julian only nodded, shoulders sinking, not in defeat, but in acceptance. "Mrs. Campbell is right," he said. "I am a problem money can't fix. A problem nothing can fix. You'll stay here, watch me rot, and wait for... What? For me to turn into something better? To repay a debt that cannot be repaid?" Louisa returned to wiping the books, applying more pressure than necessary. "I don't know what I expect, but I didn't cross an ocean to leave just because your grace is uncomfortable with my presence." "Uncomfortable?" He repeated the word like tasting poison. "That's a curious way to describe this. And what word would your grace use?" Julian was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Deserved." The word hung between them. Confession, surrender, acknowledgement. Louisa felt something twist inside her, an emotion she couldn't name. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Something tangled, woven from shared pain and mirrored grief. She finished the shelf in silence. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Jonathan. What was he like?" Louisa froze in the doorway. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I need to. Because..." His voice dropped. "You're right. I cannot forget. But all I remember is the boy in my office, pale, desperate. I want to remember more. I want to know who he was before I ruined him." She should refuse. Should keep those memories locked, safe from the man who helped destroy them. But something in his voice, something close to pleading, to genuine need, made her hesitate. "He was cheerful," she said softly, still facing the door. "Laughed easily, believed in people even when he shouldn't, taught me constellations when we were children, said stars were promises God made." She swallowed. "He died without seeing any of them kept." Silence. Then a whisper so faint she barely caught it. "I'm sorry." Louisa left without answering. She descended the stairs on trembling legs, slipped into the empty pantry, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had done. She had come seeking vengeance, had come to make a monster pay. But the man upstairs was no monster. He was a ruin, drowning in guilt whiskey could never erase. And that, she realized with growing dread, made everything infinitely harder. Because hating monsters was easy. But how did one hate a broken mirror reflecting their own grief? Chapter 6. The Taste of Guilt. Julian did not come down for supper. He hadn't come down for any meal since he arrived at Glenmore 3 years ago, 4 perhaps. Time had a cruel talent for slipping away when every day looked like the last. Mrs. Campbell would bring a tray to his door, leave it on the table outside, and return hours later to retrieve it nearly untouched. But tonight was different. Tonight there was another presence in the house, a presence that climbed stairs, cleaned rooms, breathed like a living accusation. Louisa Harding, sister of the man he had killed, not with his hands, but killed all the same. He was cheerful, laughed easily. Her words echoed in Julian's mind as he watched night fall across the moor. He tried to recall Jonathan Harding laughing, but all he could conjure was the boy in his office, pale, shaking, eyes full of a despair Julian had pretended not to see because he was drowning in his own. He poured himself whiskey. 4th glass, 5th. The bottle was half empty and the sun had barely set, a bad sign even for him. He taught me constellations when we were children. Julian closed his eyes, but the darkness did not come. Instead came memories, not of Jonathan, but of himself. Another life. Another man. Julian Ashby at 23, newly inherited duke, full of plans to turn an empty title into a meaningful legacy. He had believed in progress, in duty, in a future where aristocracy meant responsibility rather than privilege. Fool, he thought. A child playing with fire. A knock sounded. Not Mrs. Campbell. She never knocked, only left trays. These knocks were firm, impatient, American. "Come in," he said, his voice rougher than intended. Louisa entered, carrying the tray. She didn't wait for permission, just placed it on the table with a competence bordering on rudeness. "Mrs. Campbell is almost 60 with failing knees," she said. "She shouldn't climb 3 flights of stairs because your Grace lacks the courage to come down to dinner." Julian lifted his glass in mock salute, touching concern. "But as we've established, courage is not my virtue." "It's not courage," she shot back. "It's laziness." The words struck like a slap. Julian set the glass down slowly, feeling anger rise, a welcome change from numbness. "Laziness," he repeated. "Is that what you see? A lazy man living in luxury?" "I see a man who's given up." Louisa didn't retreat. "I see someone who prefers drowning in self-pity to facing the consequences of his own choices. Emotional laziness, if you want a more accurate term." Julian stood, too abruptly, too unsteady. "You know nothing about me, about what I've lived, what I've lost." "You lost money. Reputation. Comfort." Her voice cut clean as a blade. "My brother lost his life, so don't lecture me about loss when you're still breathing." They stood facing one another, only a few feet apart, and yet the distance felt like an abyss. Julian saw anger burning in her amber eyes, but also something else, disappointment, as if she had expected to find a monster, and instead found only a wreck of a man. "What do you want from me?" he asked the same question he had asked before. "You said you didn't come for apologies, didn't come for money, then what? What would satisfy this need to torment me?" Louisa was silent a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, honest. "I don't know. I thought I did. I thought seeing you, confronting you would be enough, but now that I'm here..." She looked away. "It's not what I imagined." "And what did you imagine?" "A monster." The word left her lips with brutal simplicity. "A cruel man who ruined lives without thinking twice. Someone easy to hate." Her eyes returned to his. "But your Grace isn't a monster. You're just... pathetic." The word should have roused fury, wounded pride, but Julian only nodded. "You're right. That's exactly what I am. Pathetic. A coward drowning in a bottle because I don't have the courage to face what I did sober." He walked to the window, staring into the blackness outside. "You want the truth?" "I wake every day hoping I won't wake at all. I go to sleep hoping I won't see morning. But I'm still here, breathing, existing, being useless to everyone, including myself." Silence fell. Julian heard her footsteps draw closer. She stopped beside him, not close enough to touch, but close enough for him to feel her presence. Warm, alive, everything he wasn't. "Jonathan didn't have the option of giving up," she said quietly. "Creditors didn't allow it. Our family didn't allow it. His honor didn't allow it. He fought until his body quit because there was no alternative." She turned to him. "But your Grace still has a choice. You have a roof, a name, time, and you choose to waste it wallowing." "And what do you suggest?" Julian laughed bitterly. "That I redeem myself, become a better man. There's no redemption for what I've done. No way back. Only... this." He gestured to the dim room, the half-empty bottle, the ruin of himself. Louisa examined him with an unreadable expression. Then, without warning, she picked up the whiskey bottle, walked to the window, opened it, and poured the rest into the night. Julian stared, stunned. "What have you done?" "Made a choice for your Grace, since you seem incapable of making one for yourself." She closed the window, set the empty bottle on the table. "Tomorrow you will come downstairs for breakfast. You will shave. You will wear clean clothes. Not because you deserve it. Not because you're redeemed, but because you're alive, and being alive means you have an obligation to live. You can't just... I can, and I will." She reached the doorway and paused. "My brother didn't get to choose between living and giving up. Your Grace does. And if you're going to waste that choice, you'll at least do it sober enough to feel every second of it." She left before he could speak. The door closed with a firmness that echoed through the empty room. Julian stood there staring at the empty bottle, then at the tray of food cooling on the table. He felt anger at her intrusion, her boldness, but beneath it, something far more dangerous. Shame. Shame at being seen like this. Shame that she could look at him and see only failure. He moved toward the table. The stew smelled of meat and herbs, simple, honest food. Mrs. Campbell's work he ignored day after day. Julian picked up the fork. His hands trembled, withdrawal beginning or simple cowardice. He put food into his mouth, chewed, swallowed. It didn't taste like redemption. It tasted like duty, obligation, the burden of continuing when it would be easier not to. But perhaps, he thought as he forced another bite, that was exactly what he deserved. No peace, no forgetting, just the grinding labor of existing day after day with the weight that would never lift. And perhaps, just perhaps, Louisa Harding was right. Perhaps this was worse than any vengeance she could have planned. Chapter 7. Fragments of Light. Louisa woke before dawn with her heart pounding too hard. She had dreamed of Jonathan, not the pale, broken Jonathan from his last letters, but the boy of her childhood laughing as he taught her to skip stones across the creek. In the dream, he was trying to tell her something, but his voice kept dissolving into the sound of water. She woke with his name on her lips and cold tears on her cheeks. She dressed in the dark, fingers trembling over the buttons. 3 days at Glenmore, and the house was already seeping into her bones. The unending cold, the heavy stillness, the feeling of being trapped in a place where time had given up moving. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was him, the Duke she should have hated, but who revealed himself to be nothing more than a shattered man, lost in ways that mirrored her own. No, she told herself sharply, he is no victim, he made choices. Jonathan did not. But the line between the two men was beginning to blur at the edges, unwelcome, unsettling. She went downstairs expecting to find Mrs. Campbell, but the kitchen was empty. Only a note lay on the table. Went to the village for supplies, back by midday. Louisa stood alone in the sleeping hush of the house, listening to the tick of the hall clock and the wind scraping against the windows. She brewed tea with automatic movements, trying not to think of the empty whiskey bottle still sitting on Julian's table. It had been unforgivable boldness. No servant intruded like that. No servant forced decisions on her master. But she wasn't a servant. She was a woman who had crossed an ocean for revenge and discovered revenge tasted like ash. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made her head lift. Julian Ashby descended slowly, one hand braced on the railing like a man recovering from illness. But he was shaved, his face clean, revealing a strong jaw and a thin scar at his left temple she hadn't seen before. He wore a fresh white shirt, a dark waistcoat, trousers that looked recently brushed. His hair was still too long but tied back with a strip of leather. He looked like a duke again. Or at least the ghost of one. He paused in the kitchen doorway, and their eyes met. The shadows beneath his green eyes were deep. One night without whiskey had demanded its price. "I came," he said simply. Louisa nodded, not trusting her voice. She served tea, sliced bread, and set everything before him. Julian sat, not at the head of the table, but in an ordinary chair like an ordinary man. They ate in silence. He drank the tea slowly, as though every sip required concentration. His hands trembled slightly around the cup. Louisa pretended not to notice. "There was no whiskey," he said at last. I looked. "I know. You hid the bottles? I asked Mrs. Campbell to put them away. You can find them if you want." She held his gaze steady. "But you'll have to get up, search, ask. It won't be easy." Julian studied her. Cruel. Necessary. He almost smiled. A faint twitch of the mouth, gone as quickly as it came. "Was Jonathan like you?" This determined. The question struck unexpectedly. Louisa set down her tea, feeling the old ache coil in her chest. "He was softer, kinder. He believed in the good in people even when he shouldn't." She paused. "I was always the practical one. The one counting coins, seeing problems, warning about risks. He used to say I worried too much. And you were right. About the risks. Yes. But it doesn't feel like victory. Bitterness rose like bile. I'd rather have been wrong and still have him alive. Silence. The clock marked the seconds. Outside, the first thin light of dawn crept across the moor. When he came to me, Julian said quietly, I was desperate. The mining venture seemed like salvation. A solid investment, guaranteed returns, a safe future. Or so the papers said. The experts. The men I thought trustworthy. He dragged a hand down his face. Jonathan invested everything on my word. And I gave that word based on lies I didn't see for what they were. Louisa heard the weight in his voice, not an excuse but a confession. Your Grace didn't know they were lies. I should have. His voice was raw. It was my duty to know. Signing contracts, guaranteeing investments, pulling people into ventures. That demands caution I didn't possess. I was too young, too ambitious, too blinded by what I wanted to build. He raised his eyes. But ignorance is not innocence. Not when lives hinge on your decisions. The brutal honesty made him oddly more human. Louisa tried to hold on to her anger, to keep it burning, but something in her began to give way, not forgiveness, but understanding. Painful, unwanted understanding. Jonathan trusted too easily, she said. He always did. I warned him about leaving for England, warned him about grand promises, but he... Her voice tightened. He wanted so badly to prove himself. To make our father proud. Did he? Julian's voice was barely a breath. I don't know. Father died 6 months after Jonathan. They say it was his heart, but I know it was grief. Julian closed his eyes like she had struck him. 2 men. Because of my stupidity, 2 men. 3, Louisa whispered. My mother died years before. But it was the 3 of us. Father, Jonathan, and me. Now there is only me. Alone in a foreign land, cleaning the house of the man who ruined everything. She hadn't meant to reveal so much. The words spilled out like blood from a wound long closed and suddenly torn open. She looked away, blinking hard against the burn in her eyes. Silence. Then Julian's voice so quiet she barely heard it. I know I'm sorry means nothing. I know it fixes nothing. But I have nothing else to offer. It's only this. He gestured to himself, a man broken, trying to reassemble himself, failing, trying again. It isn't redemption. It isn't justice. It's only a man trying not to sink any further. Louisa looked at him across the table, hair drying slowly, clean clothes, hands trembling around a cup like it was the only thing anchoring him to the world. He wasn't the arrogant duke she had imagined. He wasn't a monster. He was Julian Ashby, carrying a weight he would never put down. And she was Louisa Harding, carrying a grief that would never heal. Perhaps she thought the 2 of them were nothing more than ruins trying to make sense of the wreckage. I need to clean the east wing today, she said at last, her voice steadier. Mrs. Campbell said it's been closed for years. Julian blinked, surprised by the shift. It has. There's no reason to open it. There is now. Mold doesn't wait for reasons. She collected the cups. Your Grace may help. Or you can return upstairs and look for hidden whiskey. Your choice. He watched her, long, measuring, as if trying to understand something he had forgotten how to name. Then, slowly, he rose. I'll show you where the keys are. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't healing. But it was a beginning, fragile, uncertain, built on ash and guilt. Louisa followed him through Glenmore's dark corridors and allowed herself for the first time since she arrived to feel something besides rage. She felt possibility, small, frightening, impossible to name, but there, growing in the cracks between grief and forgiveness, between justice and mercy, like stubborn light slipping through fractured glass. Chapter 8. The Weight of Closed Doors. The east wing of Glenmore smelled like time gone stale. Julian held the key far too long before sliding it into the lock. A hesitation Louisa recognized instantly. Not fear, exactly. A kind of quiet regret. The door groaned open, revealing a corridor lined with portraits draped in sheets and windows, where dust drifted through thin shafts of light. "I haven't been in here for 3 years, I think," he said, his voice strangely empty. Louisa stepped past him with her bucket and rags, refusing to be intimidated by the ghosts of aristocracy long dead, but something in the silence made her pause. This wasn't just neglect. This was deliberate, as if every closed room were a sutured wound, ugly, painful, necessary. "Why this wing?" she asked. "Why close this one in particular?" Julian lingered in the doorway, as though some invisible line kept him from crossing it. "It was my mother's," he said. "After my father died, she chose these rooms, said the view was better." He looked toward the cobwebbed windows. But that was a gentle lie. She wanted distance, from the rest of the house, from the rest of us. Us. A curious word. It implied siblings, a family, a life Louisa could hardly imagine existing in such a desolate place. "You have siblings, Your Grace?" "Had." He exhaled. "A sister. Catherine. She married a French count, moved to Paris before everything collapsed. We haven't spoken in 5 years, perhaps. She sent one letter after the scandal, a polite note about protecting her husband's reputation." His jaw tightened. I understood. The neutrality in his tone was too polished to be real. Louisa knew the difference. She'd worn that same mask herself. "And your mother?" "She died when I was 25, 2 years before everything fell apart." Julian finally stepped into the room, each footfall measured like he was navigating a minefield. Lucky woman. She never saw what I did to the name she guarded like treasure. Louisa pulled a sheet from a velvet armchair, sending dust spiraling into the air. The furnishings beneath were elegant, green velvet, polished mahogany, a bookshelf of French titles, a cultured woman's room, refined tastes, nothing like Louisa's own mother, whose hands had been rough from work, whose love had come in the shape of warm soups and mended socks, but a mother nonetheless. "Did she love you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, too intimate, too presumptuous, but Julian didn't bristle. He walked to a window and touched the dusty frame. "In her way," he said, "a distant way. She wasn't a woman of embraces or soft words, but yes, she loved me." He paused. "At least she loved the son I was before disappointing every person I ever met." Louisa slapped a cushion harder than necessary. "You have a talent for self-pity." He turned, an eyebrow raised. "Says the woman who crossed an ocean to confront ghosts. My ghosts deserve confrontation. Yours deserve only that you get out of bed before noon." For a heartbeat, Julian simply stared at her, stunned. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a hoarse, rusty sound, as if laughter were a foreign language he was relearning. Something warm and unwelcome tightened in Louisa's chest. "Mrs. Campbell was right," he said. "You are American to the bone. No subtlety, no courtesy. Just sharp truth thrown like stones." "Truth works better than kindness," Louisa said, dragging a heavy trunk aside to reveal a moth-eaten carpet. "Kindness lets people hide. Truth makes them look." "And what do you see when you look at me?" Julian asked, "besides coward, pathetic, and drowning in self-pity?" It was meant as sarcasm, but Louisa heard the underneath of it, a genuine question, fragile and bare. He wanted to know, maybe needed to. She paused her work, studying him in the dim winter light. Julian Ashby standing in his dead mother's room, clean but rumpled clothes, hair refusing to stay tied, green eyes heavy with 1,000 regrets. "I see a man who gave up too early," she said at last. "A man who had the luxury of choosing defeat when others didn't. But also," she hesitated, "I see a man who remembers, who carries names and faces, who refuses to forget even when forgetting would make life easier." "That doesn't absolve me," he murmured. "No, but it makes you human." She picked up her cloth again. "Monsters don't remember. They don't feel. You feel too much. That's your problem." Silence. Louisa heard him move closer. When she looked up, he was beside her, taking the sheet off a chair without asking. They worked together for a long time, wiping away dust, opening windows to let the moor wind sweep out the stale air. "Why didn't you marry?" he asked suddenly. "Not here in Boston, a woman like you." "Marriage requires a dowry, Your Grace. Jonathan took everything when he left. What remained went to his debts." Louisa scrubbed a window with brisk motions. "And I didn't want a new life. I wanted justice. I wanted someone to pay for what we lost." "And did I pay?" His voice was quiet. Louisa stopped. "A good question. 3 days in a ruined house. 3 days watching a broken man try to function. 3 days feeling anger melt into something far more complicated. I don't know," she admitted. "I thought it would be simple. I would see you, accuse you, and feel vindicated. But nothing is simple. Not anymore." Julian stepped closer, close enough that Louisa felt the warmth of him, the first time she'd truly noticed he was flesh and blood, not an abstract symbol of guilt. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Not in self-pity, not in drunken misery, but in real pain. "I'm sorry you came seeking justice and found only this, a useless man in an empty house." Louisa forced herself to meet his gaze. Mistake. In the clean light streaming through the freshly opened window, Julian looked different. Younger, almost, or simply less ghost. Those green eyes studied her with a quiet intensity that made her feel unbearably seen. "You aren't useless," she heard herself say. "Just lost." "There's a difference?" "Yes, the useless can't be found. The lost maybe can." She stepped back before the moment grew too close. "But that's not my responsibility." "No," Julian said softly. "It isn't." But he sounded almost disappointed. "You came to collect a debt, not to save the debtor." "Exactly." So why did it feel like the line between the two was beginning to blur? Why did every conversation, every shared silence, every blunt truth hollow her anger and replace it with something warm and fragile and dangerous? They worked until the winter sun began to sink. The east wing breathed again, dust lifted, windows open, stale air replaced with the sharp, clean scent of the moor. Not healing, but a beginning. As they stepped out, Julian paused in the doorway, looking back at the revived room with an unreadable expression. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For making me come back here. For not letting me rot in peace." A half smile, sad around the edges. "Even if it's only so you can punish me properly." Louisa almost denied it, almost insisted it wasn't punishment. But the words died. Because maybe it was. Maybe making him live, remember, feel, was the worst vengeance she could have devised. "Good night, Your Grace," she said, her voice softer than intended. "Julian." The correction slipped out like a plea. "You have no reason to call me Your Grace. I'm a ruined duke, remember?" She should have refused. Should have maintained formality, distance, the clear line between the wronged and the one who wronged. But something in his voice, in the unguarded vulnerability, made her hesitate. "Good night, Julian," she said at last, and climbed the stairs with the unsettling feeling that something had shifted. Something small, imperceptible but irrevocable, like the first crack in ice that once seemed unbreakable. Chapter 9. The Taste of Almost. The days that followed melted into one another like candle wax, each slightly different, yet forming a pattern Louisa couldn't quite name. Julian came down for breakfast. They worked side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes in fractured conversations that never quite reached what they truly wanted to say. He did not drink, or drank less, and only when he thought she wouldn't notice. Room by room, Glenmore began to breathe again. But something else was happening. Something Louisa felt at the edges of her awareness, thin and treacherous as ice over deep water. She had started to see him, not the Duke, not the man who had ruined Jonathan. Julian, the man who read French poetry under his breath while rearranging books, the man who knew the names of every star Jonathan had once pointed out to her, the man who held teacups with unnecessary care, as if afraid of breaking them, or of breaking himself. It was on a Friday night at Glenmore that everything shifted. Louisa had finished supper, and gone up to her small room beneath the eaves, but sleep refused to come. A restless unease drove her out of bed and toward the narrow window overlooking the moor. The moon was full, turning the landscape into a world of silver and shadow. Brutally beautiful, like everything in this place. Movement in the garden caught her eye. Julian, walking among the stone paths choked with heather. Alone. No coat, despite the kind of cold that made the window pane burn against her fingers. He walked without destination, hands in his pockets, head bowed. Louisa left her room before she had time to think better of it. She grabbed a shawl, crossed the sleeping kitchen, and stepped out the back door. The cold hit her like a slap, slicing through the thin fabric. She followed him along the stone path until she reached him by the low wall that separated the garden from wild moorland. "So you're going to catch pneumonia," she said. Julian turned, genuine surprise crossing his features. "You can't sleep either?" "Either? I rarely sleep much." His tone was matter of fact, not seeking pity. "Usually there are nightmares, faces, names. Jonathan is always among them." Louisa stepped closer and held out the shawl. "At least die from a guilty conscience, not from a chill." He took it with a half smile and draped the shawl over his shoulders. The sight was ridiculous, a duke wrapped in a woman's shawl under moonlight, but he didn't seem to notice or care. "The moon is beautiful tonight," he said, looking up. "My mother used to say full moon nights were for confessing truths. Light reveals what the dark lets us hide." "What truths are you hiding?" she asked. "Julian," he corrected automatically. Then, more quietly, "That I'm afraid." The confession startled her more than if he tivesse gritado. Louisa waited, saying nothing, simply standing there as he had learned to do for her, a silent witness to a pain being dragged into the open. "Afraid of what?" she asked at last. He exhaled, breath white in the cold air. "Recently I've realized I'm afraid you'll leave." The words came quickly, as if holding them in hurt more than letting them out. "That one morning I'll wake up and you'll be gone. Back to Boston, back to a life that makes sense, and I'll go back to being nothing but this." A ghost rattling around an empty house. Something tightened in her chest. "I came for revenge. I didn't come to keep you company." "Julian," he insisted again, stubborn. He turned fully toward her, moonlight catching in his green eyes, sharpening them into something almost incandescent. "And I know that. I know your coming was born from rage. But these last weeks, for the first time in years, I've woken with a reason. A reason to come downstairs, to dress, to not drown myself in a bottle before noon. Not because I've redeemed myself, I haven't, but because you're here. Because someone sees me, someone who doesn't pretend, doesn't lie, doesn't spare me. Someone who isn't afraid of me." "That's not healthy," Louisa said, but her voice lacked the steel she meant to summon. "I'm not a responsibility for you to carry." "No." He took a step closer. Too close. She should have stepped back. She didn't. "But it is my choice. I know I came into your life through your anger. I know every time you look at me you see what I did to Jonathan, but I'd rather be seen as guilty than not be seen at all. Julian." His name on her lips felt dangerous, too natural, too easy. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said, voice low and urgent. "I don't deserve it. I never will. But I am asking you to stay a little longer. Not because I owe you, though I do. Because for the first time in years I don't want to stop breathing, and I know that is because of you." She looked up at him and found nothing but unvarnished truth in his face. Julian wasn't trying to seduce her, wasn't twisting words. He was simply doing what his mother had once described, laying truth bare under moonlight, letting it expose everything shadows had once concealed. And God help her, she understood, because she felt it too. Not forgiveness, not yet, perhaps never. But connection born from grief that recognized grief, from loneliness that recognized its reflection. Jonathan had bound them together in life through tragedy. Now he bound them in death through something even more dangerous. "I can't stay forever," she said, but even to her it sounded thin. "I'm not asking for forever, just more time. Whatever you can give." The wind swept between them, carrying the scent of heather and wet earth. Louisa felt her hair slip from its pins, saw the shawl slide slightly from his shoulders. She should go back. Back to her narrow bed, to the safety of walls, to the clarity of the purpose that had brought her across an ocean, vengeance, justice, making him pay. But vengeance had become an abstract shape compared to the reality of him standing in front of her, vulnerable in a way men of his rank were never meant to be, human in a way monsters never could be. "Tell me about the nightmares," she said, instead of the sensible things she should have said. "About the faces you see." Julian studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to speak. Names, stories, families broken. Some Louisa recognized from the research she'd done before leaving Boston. Others were new, more lives to add to the grim tally of those touched, shattered by his decisions. He didn't spare himself, didn't excuse, didn't ask for absolution. He simply confessed under the cold silver light, just as she'd demanded from the very beginning. Remember. Always remember. When he finally fell silent, his voice raw from the weight of what he'd said, Louisa realized they were sitting on the low wall now, shoulders almost touching. She didn't remember sitting down, didn't remember stepping closer. "Jonathan isn't alone," she murmured. "In your nightmares, he has company." "I don't know if that comforts me or terrifies me." "It should terrify you," Julian said quietly. "It means I destroyed many." "It means you remember many," she countered. "There's a difference." She looked down at her hands. "Truly cruel men don't lose sleep. They don't carry names, they don't—" "Don't what?" he asked. "Don't tremble when they speak of them." She turned to him and saw surprise flash across his features. "Your hands shake, Julian. Every time you speak of Jonathan, of the others, I've seen it. I always see it." He glanced down at his hands as if noticing them for the first time. "I hadn't realized." "Because you're too busy hating yourself to notice how thoroughly you've already punished yourself," she said softly. "More than any court could." Silence settled over them. Then, almost inaudible, "That doesn't undo what I've done." "No." She drew in a slow breath. "But maybe it means there's still a man beneath all that guilt, a man who could try to be better." Julian lifted his head, and Louisa saw tears he refused to shed shining in the moonlight. Saw something fragile, terrifying, hope, stirring where only despair had lived. "You believe that?" he asked. "Do I?" she wondered. Did she believe that the man who had destroyed her brother deserved a second chance? Did she believe his suffering could balance what he'd done? No, it didn't balance. It never would. But maybe it wasn't about balance. Maybe it was about not letting more lives be wasted, not adding Julian's name to the list of the dead, even if his heart still beat. "I believe," she said slowly, "that giving up is a luxury none of us can afford. Jonathan couldn't, I can't. And Your Grace, you can't either." She caught herself. "You can't, Julian." Something passed over his face. Relief, gratitude, something larger than words had room to hold. His hand moved hesitant and settled over hers on the cold stone. Louisa should have pulled away, should have stood, gone back inside, rebuilt the wall between them. But his hand was warm against the night air, and its weight felt less like a chain and more like an anchor, not trapping her but keeping her from drifting aimlessly into the dark. They stayed like that while the moon crossed the sky, two wrecks perched on a low wall, holding onto each other in a way more fragile and more honest than any embrace could have been. When at last they rose and walked back toward the house, when they parted at the stairs, she climbing toward the servants' rooms and he turning toward the library where he would face yet another long night, something essential had changed. Louisa lay down on her narrow bed and finally admitted the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She no longer knew if she wanted revenge. What she wanted, terribly, desperately, was for the pain to stop. Hers, his, and the pain of all the ghosts that followed them through the halls of Glenmore. And that, she realized with a creeping sense of dread, was far more dangerous than any hatred she had carried across the ocean. Chapter 10. A choice made among ruins. Julian never made it to the library. He stood in the corridor for a long time, listening to Louisa's footsteps climbing the servants' stairs, listening to the distant click of her door. Only when silence settled again did he allow himself to breathe, a long, trembling exhale from a man who had nearly drowned and found air by accident. Giving up is a luxury neither of us can afford. Her words echoed in him like a bell struck too hard. Louisa had not forgiven him. She made that clear with every look, every pause, every quiet razor of truth. But she had offered something far more dangerous than forgiveness. Possibility. The possibility that he could be more than the sum of his failures. He walked to the study he had not entered in years. The door groaned when he pushed it open, revealing a room frozen in abandonment, a desk buried under dust, stacks of unpaid bills, unanswered letters, folders left to rot. Evidence of a life he'd walked away from. He lit a lamp, sat in the chair that protested under his weight, and for the first time in 3 years, forced himself to look. Numbers, names, debts, piled like winter snow, silent, steady, suffocating. Selling off the smaller properties hadn't been enough. A hollow title didn't appease creditors. But there was one thing he had not sold. Land. 300 acres of heather-covered moorland surrounding Glenmore. Useless for farming, worthless to most. Valuable only to men who understood the strange beauty of wildness, or to the railway companies now carving routes through the northern counties. Julian pulled a clean sheet of paper toward him and dipped the pen into half-dried ink. He wrote, not a confession, not a plea, not a lament, a proposal, a business offer to a railway company in Edinburgh. 300 acres in exchange for a sum that would cover, not all but many, of the debts choking the estate. Not redemption, but a beginning. He wrote until his fingers ached and the lamp began to gutter. When he finally stopped, there were 4 letters on the table, 1 to his lawyer in London, 1 to the railway, 2 to his largest creditors. Every sentence crafted with a precision he had not exercised in years. Every line a step away from the abyss. When he sealed the last envelope, his hands trembled. Not from drink. He hadn't touched a bottle in days, though the nights were filled with sweats and shaking as his body complained. But from something worse. Hope. Fragile, terrifying hope that he might finally pay what he owed. Not the debt of a life. That one was unpayable. But the debt of responsibility. Louisa had done this. Louisa, who had crossed an ocean fueled by righteous fury, who had seen him at his lowest and refused to let him rot there. Not out of kindness. She had been very clear it wasn't kindness, but because letting more lives be wasted would be an insult to the dead. He looked out the study window. Dawn was spreading across the moor, painting it in gold and rose, colors he had not truly seen in years. He had believed Glenmore held no beauty anymore, only decay and ghosts. Perhaps he had simply been too blind to see. He climbed the stairs before he had fully decided to. His body moved ahead of thought, propelled by something fierce and urgent. He reached her door and knocked lightly. Movement inside. Then Louisa appeared, hair loose for the first time, falling in soft brown waves to her waist. She wore only a nightdress and a shawl, wholly inappropriate for visitors, yet she did not retreat. Julian? Her voice was still rough with sleep. She used his name naturally now. When had that changed? I wrote some letters. The words tumbled out too quickly. To the lawyer, to my creditors, to a railway company. I'm selling the land, I'll pay what I can, it won't cover everything, but... He stopped, noticing how breathless he sounded. It's a beginning. You said giving up was a luxury, so I won't give up. Louisa studied him, amber eyes hazy with sleep yet sharply attentive. Why? She asked softly. Why now? Because you're right. Jonathan fought until the end. I have no right to do less. He took a step toward her. Because for the first time in years I want to wake up tomorrow, and the day after I want... His voice caught. I want to be the kind of man who deserves the way you looked at me last night, under the moon, when you said you believed. Her expression shifted. Surprise, caution, something gentler flickering beneath both. This doesn't change the past, she said. I know. It doesn't bring Jonathan back. I know. Then why do it? Because the future still exists, he said simply. And wasting it would be spitting on his grave. He held her gaze. You came here to force me to remember. I remember. Every name, every face. But now I have to choose what to do with that. I can let guilt hollow me out until there's nothing left. Or I can try to be worthy of the second chance you never meant to give. Tears gathered in her eyes, catching the faint morning light. Louisa blinked hard, refusing to let them fall. I didn't come to give you a second chance. I know. You came to punish me, and it worked. He reached for her hand, a gentle touch, a question, not a demand. But punishment without end is just waste. Let me try. Let me prove that remembering doesn't have to mean sinking, that I can carry the weight and still move. She did not pull her hand away. She didn't clasp his, but she didn't withdraw. And if you fail, she whispered. Then I fail trying, he said. Better than dying having never tried. Louisa closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was a decision inside, one that had cost her something precious. I'll stay, she said, a little longer, not forever, but until we see whether the letters bring answers, whether the land can pay the debts. She paused. But I don't stay as a servant. I stay as a witness, to make sure you don't give up again when things become difficult. Relief flooded him so strongly, his knees nearly gave way. Yes, he breathed. Anything. Whatever you want. Just may stay. But you must promise me something. Anything. When things begin to improve, if they improve, you won't forget how you came to this point. You won't forget Jonathan, or the others. You'll carry their names, not as an anchor dragging you down, but as a compass. So you never cause that kind of pain again. Julian nodded, throat too tight for words. Louisa stepped closer, rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek. A brief chaste touch, yet it burned like a mark branded onto him. Sleep now, Julian, she murmured. It's still early. We'll post the letters later. She closed the door softly behind her. Julian remained in the dark corridor, a hand pressed to the cheek she had kissed, his heart beating in a way it hadn't in years. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't love, but it was a pact. Witness and witnessed. Survivor and the one who had caused the wound, both choosing not to let the dead rule the living. He descended the stairs, feeling the weight on his shoulders shift, lighter, not gone, never gone, but bearable. With help, with purpose, it was bearable. For the first time in years, he slept without nightmares. He dreamed of golden moorland, sealed letters, and a woman with amber eyes saying his name as if it were a promise, not an accusation. And when he woke with the sun already high, he went down to breakfast without hesitation. Louisa was there, hair pinned up again, posture steady. She poured his tea without a word. But when their eyes met, something passed between them. A silent understanding, a fragile alliance rising from ash. We'll go to the village to post the letters, she said. Together. Together, he echoed. And for the first time, the word didn't sound like a sentence. It sounded like possibility. Chapter 11. The day the world opened. The walk to the village was the first time Louisa saw Julian in full daylight, far from Glenmore's shadows. He wore a dark wool coat and a hat pulled low, yet people still stared, or rather, stared at him. Glances that darted away too quickly, whispers that died the moment they passed. The fallen duke, said their eyes, the man who ruined families and retreated to this forgotten corner of Scotland. Louisa saw the tension in his jaw, the way his breath caught, but Julian kept walking, steady steps, head held high. Not out of pride, his pride had died years ago, but out of a fragile dignity he was fighting desperately to keep. The post office was a small annex attached to the village grocer. The clerk, a middle-aged man with thick spectacles, looked up and froze when Julian entered. Your Grace, it has been a long time. It has. Julian placed 4 sealed letters on the counter. They must go out today, 2 to London, 2 to Edinburgh. The clerk handled the envelopes with hands that trembled slightly. Fear, surprise, or simply the weight of seeing the Duke again. Louisa couldn't tell. He read the addresses, eyebrows lifting in quiet astonishment. Business matters. Yes. Julian offered nothing more. He paid, turned toward the door, then paused. Thank you. For your discretion. The clerk gave a slow nod. Your Grace was always polite. Even when others were not. It was a small absolution, barely a thread. But Louisa saw what it did to Julian, the faint loosening of his shoulders, the slow return of his breath. Acknowledgement of humanity, however minor, could still touch him. Outside, the sun struggled through clouds. The wind carried the smell of distant rain and wood smoke. Louisa tightened her shawl, preparing to walk back, but Julian surprised her. There's a place I want to show you, he said. If you have time. She should have refused, should have returned to Glenmore, to boundaries, to distance, but curiosity tugged at her. Show me. Julian led her along a narrow trail climbing the hill behind the village. They walked in silence, wind rustling through the heather, their breathing deepening with the ascent. At the crest, Louisa stopped dead. The world opened before her, miles and miles of wild moorland rolling in purples and dark greens, small lochs shimmering like shattered mirrors, distant mountains carved against a storm-bruised sky. It was savage. It was beautiful. It hurt to look at. I used to come here when I was young, Julian said quietly. Before the title. Before everything. I'd climb up here to think, or to feel small. It's a good thing feeling small. Reminds you your problems aren't unique. That the world is larger than your mistakes. Louisa studied his profile against the sky. And why did you stop coming? Because I stopped wanting to feel small. I wanted to feel important, powerful, capable of changing things. A bitter half-smile ghosted across his lips. And I did change things, just not the way I intended. She sat on a moss-covered stone. An invitation. Julian sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance, yet undeniably present. You know what Jonathan told me before he left? Louisa said, eyes fixed on the horizon. He said he was going to prove the Hardings were more than Boston merchants, that we could matter, that our name would mean something. Her voice cracked. Now it means nothing but a headstone and debts. No. The word came firm, immediate. She turned, startled. It means courage. It means a sister who crossed an ocean for justice. It means a man who fought until he had nothing left. It means... He swallowed hard. It means you mattered. All of you. Tears burned before she could stop them. For the first time since arriving in Scotland, she let them fall. She cried for Jonathan, for her father, for her mother, gone too soon, for the life she should have had, the family that should still exist, for everything stolen, everything shattered, everything that would never return. Julian didn't touch her, didn't offer hollow comfort. He simply stayed, silent witness as she had been for him, and somehow that was enough. When the sobs faded, Louisa wiped her face with the back of her hand. Sorry. Don't apologize, Julian murmured. Never apologize for remembering. She looked at him then, really looked, and she saw not the ghost who had haunted Glenmore's halls, not the monster she'd imagined in Boston, but a man fighting, failing, fighting again. A man crushed under guilt he would never escape, yet still trying to rise. What happens, she whispered, when the letters bring answers, when you sell the land, when the debts are paid? What happens then? Julian was silent for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe I try to rebuild what I can. Maybe I simply try to live without destroying anything else. It's not an ambitious goal, but it's honest. And me? The question escaped before she could stop it. Raw, unguarded. Where did she fit? She wasn't just Jonathan's sister anymore, wasn't just a servant, wasn't just a vigilante driven by grief. What was she now? Wherever you wish to be, he said, voice low. If you want to return to Boston, I understand. I'll pay your passage, give you references, Whatever you need." He paused. "But if you want to stay, there is a place for you. Not as a maid, not as an employee, but as a partner. Someone who keeps me honest. Someone who reminds me why I wake up in the morning. That isn't fair to me. No, it isn't. But it is your choice. It has always been your choice." Louisa turned back to the landscape, seeking answers in the distant peaks. She had come seeking revenge, found a man already punishing himself every day, sought justice, found grief, shared and echoing. She had come to make him pay, but discovered he was already paying, in a currency no court could measure. Somewhere along the path the line between hatred and understanding had blurred until it disappeared. It wasn't love, not yet. Perhaps never. But it was connection, born of pain, shaped by truth, sustained by choice. "I'll stay," she said softly, "until the answers come, until we know if the land is enough. After that," she looked at him, "we decide. Together." Relief flooded Julian's face so openly it squeezed her heart. He extended his hand, an offer, not a demand. Louisa hesitated one heartbeat, then slid her hand into his. His fingers were warm, steady, trembling just a little. They sat like that for a long time, hands intertwined, looking out at a world wide open before them. Wild, dangerous, uncertain, but open. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up on me when I had already given up." Louisa squeezed his hand. "Jonathan wouldn't have given up, so neither will I." They descended the hill as the sun dipped lower. They walked side by side, not duke and servant, not guilty and grieving, just two survivors learning to stand again. And when Glenmore came into view, the house no longer looked like a tomb. It looked simply like a house, old, wounded, but still capable of holding life. For the first time since Jonathan died, Louisa felt something besides pain. She felt possibility. Fragile as the first light of dawn, but undeniable. She felt perhaps that the future could be something more than vengeance carved from the past. Chapter 12, Where Light Meets the Earth. 4 months later. Louisa woke to sunlight spilling through the window. Not the narrow servant's window of the attic floor, but the wide casement on the second level, the one overlooking the moor and the mountains beyond. Julian had insisted she move after the first letter arrived, the one that changed everything. The railway company had accepted his offer. 300 acres in exchange for a sum large enough to clear most of the outstanding debts. It hadn't been a miracle, it had been work. Weeks of correspondence, legal mediation, negotiations, creditors who finally understood that receiving something was better than receiving nothing. Some debts would never be paid in full. Some names on Julian's long list would never see restitution, but it was a beginning. An honest attempt where once there had been only surrender. Louisa descended the stairs and found the house transformed. Not dramatically. Glenmore was still Glenmore. Old and wounded, shadowed with its former grandeur. But the windows were open now, letting the wind wash rooms that had been sealed for years. Furniture had been uncovered, polished, returned to life. Mrs. Campbell had hired 2 young women from the village. The house now moved with human presence, with voices, with air. Julian was in the library, as he was most mornings, but he no longer sat slumped in a chair with a glass in hand. He sat at the desk, letters arranged before him, pen gliding with the steadiness of a man rebuilding himself, one line at a time. He looked up when she entered. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. Still rare, still fragile, but no longer a stranger. "A letter arrived from London," he said, sliding an envelope toward her. "From Mr. Whitfield." Louisa recognized the name, one of Jonathan's creditors, a man who had lost a considerable investment in the mining collapse. She opened the letter with fingers that trembled lightly. "Your Grace, I received your communication and partial repayment regarding the debts of the late Mr. Jonathan Harding. Though the amount does not cover the full sum, I acknowledge the effort and the honor in settling what can be settled. I consider the matter closed. May God bless your future endeavors." Louisa read it twice, then a third time. Something tightened painfully in her chest. It was not full redemption. It never would be. But it was recognition. It was closure for a wound that had been raw for far too long. "One less," Julian said quietly, watching her. "It doesn't erase anything, but it restores honor," Louisa finished softly. She set the letter down and looked at him. Jonathan would have been relieved to know someone tried to pay what he could not. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind they had learned to share, built from mutual understanding and grief that had softened into something survivable. Julian rose and came toward her. Over the past months, the distance between them had shrunk, not from boldness, but from something gentler, like two planets moving inevitably within each other's orbit. He stopped close enough for her to feel the warmth of him, to see the details she now knew by heart. The thin scar at his temple, the silver beginning to thread his hair, the cautious way his green eyes studied everything. "I need to tell you something," he said. Louisa's heartbeat quickened. "What is it?" "I don't know when it happened. Perhaps slowly, weeks melting into one another until the lines blurred. Or perhaps it happened that night under the moon, when you told me you believed I could try." He paused, breath controlled too carefully. "But at some point between your arrival and now, between hatred and understanding, between vengeance and—" He exhaled as if stepping over a precipice. "I fell in love with you." The words hovered in the air like startled birds. Louisa felt the ground shift beneath her. "Julian, I don't expect you to feel the same," he said quickly. "I know why you came. I know I carried you here on the wreckage of your grief. I know I am the man who ruined your family. I know love between us would be absurd, impossible, built on the foundation of tragedy." He met her eyes without flinching. "But I needed you to know. I needed honesty, between us at least. You saved me. Not from debt or ruin. Those I faced because of you, yes, but I faced them myself, and no, you saved me from the emptiness. From myself. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing only the punishment I deserved and began seeing you. Louisa. Brave, relentless, uncompromising, gentle in ways she never admitted. And I fell in love," he finished softly. Louisa closed her eyes, breath unsteady. When she had arrived 4 months earlier, she had known exactly what she felt. Anger, pain, righteous fury. Now her heart was a wild garden, roots tangled, branches twisted, impossible to divide cleanly into categories. Did she still resent him for Jonathan? A part of her always would. A scar was a scar. But there were other parts. Parts that knew the man standing before her, imperfect, guilty, but fighting to change. Parts that warmed at his voice, that sought his presence. Parts that found solace in their shared silences and the night spent talking in the library. Parts that might terrifyingly mirror what he felt. "I don't know what I feel," she whispered. "I don't know if I can love a man connected to the worst pain of my life. I don't know if it would betray Jonathan." "It wouldn't," Julian said instantly. "Jonathan wanted you to be happy. I read his letters. You showed them to me. He wrote of you with love and concern every time. He wouldn't want you frozen in your grief." "How can you know?" "Because if I had a sister, that is what I would want for her. Life, joy, a future, not chained to the dead." Tears burned her eyes. Hard truth, but truth. Jonathan wouldn't want her living inside a mausoleum of pain. "I need time," Louisa said, "to understand what I feel, to be sure it's not just shared loneliness, not just grief recognizing grief." "You have all the time you need," Julian said gently, stepping back. "I won't push. I won't ask for anything. I only needed you to know." Louisa nodded, unable to speak, unable. 2 weeks later, she climbed alone to the top of the hill Julian had brought her to months earlier. She sat on the same moss-covered stone, gazing at the moor unfolding into mountains beneath a storm-heavy sky. "Jonathan," she said aloud, her first time speaking to him since arriving in Scotland, "I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know what lies beyond, but I need to say this." The wind carried her words outward. "I came here full of hatred. I came to make him pay." And he did pay. in guilt that eats him alive, in memories that won't let him breathe. He remembers you, John. Your name, your face. He carries you like I carry you. Tears, hot, unbidden. But somewhere along the way something changed. I haven't erased you. I never will. But living only for pain feels like a waste. And you would hate waste. Silence. Then she continued, I think I'm falling in love with him. With the man who destroyed you. I know how it sounds. Wrong, impossible, a betrayal. But he's not a monster, John. He's a man who made a terrible mistake and has been trying to live with the consequences ever since, just as I've been trying to live without you. The wind rose, sharp and cold. I need your permission, or your forgiveness, or just the belief that you'd understand, that you wouldn't hate me for choosing life over mourning. Wind swept across the hillside, wild, rushing, almost warm. She imagined, or perhaps simply hoped, that Jonathan would laugh at her dramatics and tell her to stop being foolish, to live, to love, to stop wasting years worshipping a grave. Live, Lou. Just live. She descended the hill as rain began to fall, soaking her clothes, her hair, washing tears with it. She ran the last stretch to Glenmore. As she crossed the threshold, she collided with Julian, who was waiting with a towel, worry etched in every line of his face. You're drenched, you'll... She kissed him, cut him off mid-sentence with her mouth, her hands gripping his lapels, her body pressed against his with a fierce, breathless urgency born of months of hesitation. Julian froze for only a heartbeat, then answered her, arms tightening around her, kissing her back with a depth that spoke of months of restraint, love unreturned, hope almost abandoned. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Louisa looked into his green eyes, eyes full of wonder, fear, joy, disbelief. Jonathan gave me permission, she said softly. Or maybe I gave myself permission. Either way, I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Not because I forgot the past, but because I won't let the past destroy the future. Are you certain? His voice shook. Louisa, are you absolutely sure? Because if you aren't, if there is even a shadow of, I'm sure. And speaking it, she knew it was true. I love you, she said. Not simply, not easily. But I do. I love the man you were, the man you are, and the man you're fighting to become. Julian kissed her again, softer, reverent, as if she were something precious he feared he might break. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this, he whispered. Of you? You don't need to be worthy, she said. Just stay, just try, just remember and love me back. A smile touched his lips. That, he murmured, I can do. Epilogue. 1 year later. Louisa Ashby. She still wasn't used to the name, still felt that small, startled jolt of pleasure every time she heard it, stood in Glenmore's garden, watching the first spring flowers break through the still cold earth. They had planted them together in autumn, roses for beauty, lavender for fragrance, violets because they had been her mother's favorites, and daffodils, an entire field of yellow daffodils because they were Jonathan's flowers. She had planted each bulb with her own hands, Julian beside her, both of them working in a silence that was not empty, but reverent. A living memorial, growing not out of mourning but out of gratitude, for a life that had been lived, for a love that had not ended with death. Julian stepped out of the house carrying a tray, 2 cups of tea sending pale curls of steam into the cool morning air. He crossed the gravel path and sat beside her on the stone bench they had had installed, his body close to hers, their shoulders touching. They're beautiful, he said, looking out over the sea of daffodils beginning to open their bright faces to the sun. He would have liked them. He would, Louisa replied, resting her head on his shoulder. I think he would have liked you too. Eventually, after punching you a few times. Julian laughed, a sound that came more easily now, though still rare enough to be precious. I would have deserved it. They sat like that as the sun climbed higher, warming the soil, coaxing the flowers up and out of the darkness. Louisa lowered her hand to her already rounding belly, feeling the faint, fluttering movement within. New life, improbable and miraculous. Julian covered her hand with his, their fingers interlacing over the child growing there, over a future neither of them would have dared to imagine not so long ago. Glenmore was no longer a tomb. It was a home. Imperfect, haunted by a difficult history, but a home all the same. A place where a child would be born, would take their first steps across slightly uneven floors, would run between rows of daffodils and roses, would learn that love could grow even in soil watered by grief. Louisa, who had once crossed an ocean carrying nothing but anger and pain, had discovered something she had never come looking for. Redemption was not the erasing of the past. It was learning to live in spite of it. It was taking pain and choosing not to let it devour everything in its path, but to let it become something that built, instead of something that only destroyed. It was loving an imperfect man in an imperfect place, and choosing to believe that the future did not have to repeat the past. It was kneeling on rough ground, hands dirty with earth, planting flowers where there had once been nothing but heather and stone, and then staying long enough to see them rise. "I love you," Julian said quietly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, his hand still steady and warm over the life that moved beneath her skin. "I know," she answered softly. "And I love you too." Under the Scottish sky, surrounded by daffodils and promises, two survivors chose life. They chose love. They chose to go on,